that, I can go ahead and get us started. If you have just joined us, feel free to use the chat area to introduce where you're logging in from and what you love most about it. It's kind of fun to see what people are saying. But welcome to Communication Breakdowns, Tools for Working Through Conflict in the Workplace. My name is Christine Krieger, and I'm the Professional Development Consultant for the Colorado State Library. So you may be used to attending webinars where we sort of talk at you for an hour, but that's not what we're going to do with today's session. Our facilitators have some hopefully fun activities that are worked into the session to help you share your knowledge of the topic. They share their knowledge of the topic, and hopefully everybody walks away knowing more. We are going to ask that you remain muted until the end of the session. We may have time to unmute for questions, but do feel free to put questions in the chat. We are recording today's session, and the archive hopefully will be available by tomorrow on Libraries Learn. We also have the automatic captions turned on for today's session. Participants can turn them on or off using the CC button at the bottom of the screen. And if you don't see that, you can click on More. And then the corrected captions should be posted with the archive, hopefully in a few weeks. So with that out of the way, I am now delighted to introduce today's presenters. We have Andrea Kingsley, who is a youth librarian at the Aurora Public Library, and Tessie Walker, who is a branch library supervisor for the Hoffman Heights and Chambers Plaza libraries as part of the Aurora Public Library system also. So I'm going to turn it over to you guys.
Great. Thank you, everybody, for joining our session today. We're really excited to talk about this topic. And like Christine said, we're hoping that we'll have some things to share with you, and then you guys will be able to share with each other different conflict resolution techniques. So again, my name is Tessie Walker. I'm a library supervisor with the Aurora Public Library. And then I'll let Andrea also introduce herself.
My name is Andrea Kingsley, and I am the children's librarian at the Central Library.
And our intentions for today's session is to lead an interactive workshop to prepare you all for your next communication breakdown in the workplace. So that by the end of the session, you have some tools to productively start addressing the potential conflict and help you feel more confident while doing so. All right, so a little breakdown of what we're doing today. We have a couple of different methods to prepare you for your next communication breakdowns. First of all, we're going to be spending some time identifying how our organizations want us to resolve conflict in the workplace and the structures that we already have in place that you use through some introspective time is what we're going to do. And then we're going to have a general overview of what healthy and unhealthy communication looks like, and then examine a scenario during a breakout session. And then finally, we're going to quickly review two resources that we've found helpful when addressing communication breakdowns in the workplace, which are Crucial Conversations and Emotional Intelligence. But before we get to that, we have a couple of terms for you guys that Andrea and I will be using both of these a lot during the session. And I just wanted to point out the difference between the two. So first of all, we have conflict, which is a struggle in a clash of interests, opinions, or even principles. And then there's communication breakdown, which is a lack of communication, a failure to exchange information. So basically, conflict is a broader term that can encompass a variety of interactions, while a communication breakdown is a narrower version of a conflict. I like to think of it that not all conflicts are communication breakdowns, but communication breakdowns can lead to conflict. Or if you want to think of it linearly, usually I see a communication breakdown first before we get into the actual conflict. Or if I see a conflict, I'm like, oh, I missed the communication breakdown. So really quick, if you guys could use your reaction button, it's the heart on my screen. Then send an emoji of your choice to let me know if you've ever had a conflict in the workplace. And if you can't find your reaction button, just put it in the chat. Yeah, we're getting lots of thumbs up. Right, some hearts. So as we can see, the amount of emojis, it's pretty self-evident that workplace conflicts are pretty universal. So because of that, we're going to go ahead and grab something to write with in a paper if you don't already have it in front of you. And then we're going to spend about 3 minutes of introspective time, writing down some notes about how conflict is handled in your workplace. We're going to put some music in the background and a timer on the screen. We're not going to be sharing these notes with each other, but you'll be referring back to them at the end of the session for our last breakout session. So feel free to jot down notes about any or all of these questions, whichever ones you feel are the most pertinent to you. Just the idea is to remind yourself of some of the conflict tools and structures that you already have. For instance, if you're a supervisor, you might know how, or you should probably know how HR wants you to handle a workplace conflict. But if you're a front desk staff member, hopefully you hadn't had to think about how HR has a role in workplace conflict. All right, so we're going to get the music and the timer up. All right, and everybody go ahead and get started. All right, so we have about 10 seconds to finish our last thought. All right, thank you, everybody. So now everyone should have some notes about their current structures or some of the current structures of resolving conflict that they already have in the workplace. And now we're going to move on to learn some things that can hopefully help inform the structure by the end of the session.
Okay, so as much as we try to be, humans are not perfect communicators, and there's no such thing as a 100% healthy conflict. With the right approach, a communication breakdown can be an opportunity for clarification. So we're going to explore a few different ways that we can identify healthy and unhealthy communications so that you can bring the conversation back into a healthy direction. All right, first we have impact versus intent. There's the saying that we judge others by their actions and ourselves by our intentions. Hopefully, no one has woken up in the morning and decided, today I'm going to ruin the day of everyone that I run into. Most people who end up in communication breakdowns have good intentions on their way there. And if we judge a situation by our own intention and focus on the other person's impact, we're not really giving our communication partner any grace, and we're not making space for us to reflect on our own actions. It's important and healthy to try to look at the intention of your communication partner and your own impact, and then reflect on your own intention and their impact. Next, we have listening. To bear witness when we listen to each other is to use active listening skills and make sure your communication partner feels heard and understood. A good way to do this is by repeating what they've said in your own words and ask questions like, do I have that right? Or start responding with, what I'm hearing is. You also want to make space in the conversation for the other person to speak their mind. Some people may spend a lot of time forming their thoughts before they speak, and that's okay. What you don't want to do is view what they're saying as an attack or try to quote unquote win the argument. Listening to defend doesn't actually allow for a positive conclusion. If you're initiating a conversation in regards to a communication breakdown, it's important to find a safe setting for both you and your partner. You don't want to call this person out in front of other people because that can lead to defensiveness and other unhealthy communication methods. You also don't want to ignore a conflict entirely. If you find yourself in a conversation that escalates and you don't feel ready to have that conversation, a good way to work around that is by telling your partner that you aren't ready and offering a set time in the future to open that discussion. It is important, though, that you set a time in the future to follow through and make sure you do have that conversation. And finally, it's important to look at who's involved. When you're having a communication breakdown, it's not healthy to take that situation and bring it to people who aren't involved in the problem. This isn't going to bring a resolution to the breakdown, and it can foster a sense of gossip and maybe pressure people to pick sides. Instead, it's important to bring your conversation directly to the person that you need clarity from. Sometimes we might not know the right way to go when we're having a conversation like this with someone, or we might try to address a communication breakdown and find that we do need outside help. When that's the case, I think it is okay to go to a supervisor or a trusted mentor and seek advice on how to approach that situation. That being said, it is worth trying to address the scenario with your conflict partner before bringing it to anyone outside of the conflict. So with that, we have a scenario for you that we'll use during our upcoming breakout session to explore healthy and unhealthy communication approaches. I'm going to go ahead and read this for you now. And as I'm reading, consider what healthy and unhealthy approaches are being taken by both people in this scenario. All right. So Felix works at the Youth Services Public Service Desk at the Mountain Sky Public Library. He loves his job and gets to work on programs with the librarians. He loves his job and gets to work on programs with the librarians when he has downtime at work. Felix wants to be a librarian eventually and views the work as valuable experience. He recently got a new coworker, Chris, who works in the same building at the Adult Services Public Service Desk. At first, they had friendly interactions, but after a few weeks, Chris started to be a bit dismissive in their conversations. When Felix offers helpful work tips, Chris doesn't use them and says things like, "I have it handled." Felix decides he will give Chris some space since they don't work closely together anyway, until one day, Felix's supervisor, who has been impressed by his recent programming work with the librarians, asks him to work on a cross-department program with Chris. Felix is very excited since this would be his first solo library program, and wants to do a good job. Chris is hard to reach since he keeps ignoring Felix's emails, but eventually Felix manages to ask him in person and they coordinate a meeting. When they finally do have a planning meeting, Chris is late and barely pitches any ideas, so Felix feels like he has to do all of the work, even the adult programming parts of the project, which he doesn't feel confident about planning. A few days after the meeting, Chris and Felix are both helping out at the circulation desk when Felix's supervisor comes up to chat. Chris is very friendly, which surprises Felix. When his supervisor asks about the project, Chris chimes in and tells them about Felix's ideas, but makes it sound like Chris was the one who came up with them. Felix is very upset. What should he do? So we are going to break out into smaller groups and spend the next few minutes discussing healthy and unhealthy communication approaches in the scenario and what could have been changed to make it a healthier situation. We're also going to have the scenario up in those breakout groups, so don't feel like you have to have all of that memorized. When we come back, we will move on to the tools that you can use to help you with communication breakdowns, and we will have about 4 minutes to work on the scenario.
All right, I am setting up rooms. It may take just a minute or so for folks to be invited into the room. And if you end up in a room by yourself, give me just another moment and I'll make any adjustments that I need to.
Welcome back, everyone. Now that we've had a chance to discuss recognizing healthy and unhealthy communication approaches, we are going to move on to a really great tool that you can use for communication breakdowns.
So, communication breakdowns, one of the tools that I really like is Crucial Conversations. It's just one tool that you can use, but I really like it because it has really concrete steps on how you can plan the conversation and then actually conduct the conversation to hopefully resolve a communication breakdown in a respectful and professional way. So, the goal of a crucial conversation is to create what Patterson calls a pool of shared meaning or of understanding, with the hopes that after the conversation, both parties are more informed of each other's perspectives so they can hopefully productively address the situation or the conflict. So, if you read the book, it also has some helpful advice on how to prepare yourself to be in the right mindset to start planning and have the conversation by asking yourself things like, what do I want for myself? What do I want for my relationship with the other person? And hopefully in the workplace, you end up with a conclusion like, well, I have to work with this person at least neutrally so we can both do a good job. And so you can start off with a really good mindset. And then once you do that, you can address the conflict or potential conflict with someone in the workplace, and you're committed to having the conversation. You can plan it out in 3 steps. First, you'll want to go over the facts of the situation because these are the most persuasive and it's a really safe way to start the conversation. And then you want to go over what your story is about those facts. So, what is your interpretation or your perspective about those facts? Right. And so it's really important to get the chance to share how those facts make you feel or your take on them, because that's the reason that you're having the conversation in the first place and you want to help the other person understand. And then finally, you have to be prepared to ask for the other person's perspective, and make sure that you're going to actively listen and learn. So that goes back to the healthy communication tactics, right? And Patterson in the book also has some really good exploratory language that can help keep the conversation really professional and respectful, with things such as like, oh, would now be a good time to catch up with you about such and such, or our relationship is important to me. Can you help me understand? But a conversation to clear up a communication breakdowns can sometimes start to derail, which is usually an indication actually that someone doesn't feel safe to have that conversation. Either they don't feel safe with you, or they aren't safe. They don't feel safe about that conversation topic. And usually when that happens, they'll start to act one of 2 ways, right? Or both. Someone can go silent, which can mean literal silence, so they just won't say anything while you're talking. They might start to have withdrawing body language, so they might fold their arms, look away. They might try to prematurely end the conversation and be like, oh, I have to go, like I have this thing I have to do, and trying to detach themselves entirely from the conversation. Or they could use avoidance tactics such as sarcasm, right? Or they could choose violence, which hopefully is not literal violence in the workplace, but it could mean things like they could try going on the offensive. They could try and take control of the conversation, of the narrative, or they can start interrupting, or they can try to start labeling and being like, oh, you're acting like this or this way. So usually when someone starts acting in one of those two ways, it's starting to show that you need to bring the conversation back on track, or it might be unproductive. So there's a few things actually that you can try and do to bring safety back to the conversation once you've started to have it. You can try mutual purpose. So you could try clarifying your positive intent by saying things like, we have the same goals, we both want this project to be successful. Or you can try mutual respect, letting the other person know that you care enough about them that you also want them to be successful, showing that you respect them and their work and their viewpoint, right? Or you can try contrasting statements, and you would want to use this if you believe like they're misunderstanding you. You want to tell them you don't want them to think this, but you want them to think this, right? So are they mistaking what your purpose is in having the conversation? Do they feel disrespected? And if you think that might be the case, then you want to try and explain your motives for having the conversation, and how you really feel about the other person, hopefully well, like you don't want to tell them like, hey, I don't like you, because then you probably wouldn't have had this conversation in the first place and put in this much effort. So sometimes you can bring safety into a conversation in these ways, and if you succeed, you can pick up the crucial conversation back where you left off, right? But sometimes even bringing safety back can be unsuccessful, and so in those cases, you might want to go back to the healthy versus unhealthy communication model and see if maybe there's some healthy elements that you can bring in, such as maybe reconsidering the time and the place of having the conversation and stuff like that. All right. And then we're going to go to our next tool. So our last tool for today to help you, hopefully with your future communication breakdowns, is the concept of emotional intelligence. If you guys want to, in the chat, let me know what you think emotional intelligence is. And emotional intelligence is actually a really popular concept in the workplace nowadays. So a lot of you might already know what it is. You might be familiar with the entirety of emotional intelligence or maybe some parts of it. So feel free to put whatever you know about emotional intelligence in the chat. Let's see. Yeah, so we have Tanya with managing your own emotions and understanding why you feel that way. Yes, definitely. That is a core pillar of emotional intelligence. Being able to read the room, yes, definitely. Understanding your emotions and the realities of others. Having awareness of your own feelings and the feelings of others. Having empathy, being able to recognize, regulate, label emotions and communicate. Yeah, so all of you have a great idea of what emotional intelligence is, which is great. So all in all, emotional intelligence is the ability to recognize and understand emotions in yourself and others, and then using this ability to manage your behavior and relationships, which is very important in the workplace, since we end up working with a lot of different types of people, and an emotional intelligence can help us build really strong, productive relationships with them. So while Crucial Conversations was really directly about addressing communication breakdowns, I like to think of emotional intelligence as a very valuable tool for helping myself and my team avoid communication breakdowns in the first place. If not altogether, at least minimize them, hopefully. So for a really quick overview, there are 4 pillars of emotional intelligence, although sometimes I do see 5 in some articles or in some books. But first we have self-awareness, which is the ability to recognize and understand your own emotions. Beyond just recognizing your own emotions, however, is being aware of the effect of your actions, your moods, and your emotions on other people. And to become self-aware, you must be capable of monitoring your own emotions, recognizing different emotional reactions, and then correctly identifying each particular emotion. Self-aware individuals also recognize that the relationships between the things that they feel and how they behave. And then we have self-regulation, which is the ability to regulate and manage your emotions, which is not to say that you want to put your emotions on lockdown and hide your true feelings. Like, we don't want that. It simply means that you're waiting for the right time and place to express your emotions, right? And self-regulation is all about expressing your emotions appropriately. Those who are skilled in self-regulation tend to be flexible and adapt well to change, and they are also good at managing conflict and diffusing tense or difficult situations. And then we have social awareness, which is your ability to recognize and understand the emotions of others. Having empathy, you're able to pick up body language, facial expressions, postures, tone of voice, and sometimes even deeper emotions and thoughts. So, like, if you have a best friend or someone you know really, really well, like your partner, sometimes you can sense like what their deeper emotions and what their thoughts might even be based on those emotions. So it's something like that. Um, and then being able to see things from another perspective. So putting yourself in their shoes, like, can you do that? And one really interesting concept I like about social awareness is the idea of, are you opening or are you closing connections with people? For instance, like, say you have a new coworker that you have to work closely with, and are you taking the time to ask them about their day, which is opening a connection with them? Or are you interrupting them during meetings because you don't think that they know anything because they're new? And that might be closing connection with them. And then finally, we have relationship management, which results in the ability to manage your relationships with others, even people you don't like. Um, so working on the other three will help you, this pillar in particular. So if you work on the other three, it helps this one, right? Sometimes I see emotional intelligence kind of charted as a pyramid. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think you can work on all of the pillars at the same time, and they all strengthen each other. They kind of work together. But for relationship management, you can practice this pillar in a variety of ways. You can be open about yourself at work with your coworkers, so they can learn more about you. And then if you're curious about them in turn, that helps. And then another way to practice is by taking feedback from others in a positive manner. If you take it in a negative manner, you won't be building that relationship because then they won't give you feedback anymore, probably. Um, and then another way to practice is explaining decisions that you make. Don't just make them without any context or hoping that people will just understand, because they probably won't unless they have a really good relationship with you. So all of these pillars have a variety of different ways that you can practice and improve. My favorite book on emotional intelligence is by Bradbury and Greaves, and we have those in our references. And I really like this book because it has dedicated chapters to each pillar with like a lot of ways to practice, like 20 or 30 ways to practice it. So I feel like it's very productive for that. All right.
And for this next part, we are going to look at a variety of methods to practice the pillars of emotional intelligence from the book that Tessie just mentioned. What I would like for you to do is scan them, and if you look on your Zoom screen, there is a sort of pencil that says annotate when you hover over it. And if you click that stamp tool and then click on the check mark for a stamp, you can select different methods that you think would be helpful for you for ways to practice emotional intelligence. And then as we're doing that, the boxes in yellow, they help for self-awareness. The blue boxes are for self-management. Green is social awareness. Orange is effective relationships. Let's see, we already have quite a few under taking slow, deep breaths to connect with the logical part of your brain. Nice, that's a good one. Having an awareness of what you look like when you are upset. That one was like a game changer for me. Practicing empathy, stepping in someone else's shoes. Oh yes, the react button is gonna be sort of toward the bottom left of the screen. It's a pencil image, and it's right above, on my screen at least, it's right above where the audio indicator is. Spending time to think about your emotions, why you might be feeling them, and how you are expressing them. Observe the body language of other people. That's a really good one. Let's see. Taking control of your self-talk is a huge one. Building trust with open communication by sharing, being consistent, and being reliable. Nice. So, oh yes, and asking for feedback from a trusted person. And yes, if you'd like to add in the chat, if it's having a hard time, I know that certain upgrades to Zoom can have different capabilities, updates. Nice. So we have a lot under self-reflect. That's awesome. We have, it looks like we have quite a few just sort of throughout. Yeah, so to go over that one more time, the yellow boxes are for self-awareness. Blue boxes are self-management. Green is social awareness, and orange is effective relationships. So these aren't all of the ways that you can practice. There are a lot of other good ones. And the book is called Emotional Intelligence 2.0 by Bradbury and Greaves. And we'll have some references at the end with publication and more information about that too. Alrighty, fantastic. So I am going to clear our annotations. Oh, perfect. And we have one more breakout for everyone. So we are going to send you into breakouts for 5 minutes to give you a chance to have a shared reflective session with a small group where you can look at your answers without addressing conflict in the workplace that you put together at the beginning of the session. And then you can chat about if any of the things you learned today will be helpful in improving that structure.
All
And
right. Go
if
ahead.
you have any other tools for conflict resolution, feel free to share those with each other.
All right. And if I do this correctly, you guys should end up back in the same rooms that you were in before. We have lost a couple people. So once again, if you end up by yourself, I will make sure that I group you with somebody. So I'm opening the rooms now.
Right. Welcome back, everybody. For those of you who had extra tools of conflict resolution that you shared with your partners, feel free to put those in the chat to let the whole group know, which would be great. And then on the current slide, we have the main resources that we used for this presentation. And I highly recommend, if you thought that the session was interesting and you're invested in improving your conflict resolution techniques, we have a couple of further reading recommendations as well, one of which I just added in recently, but the last one by Ross and Gadbian, the Turning Towards Each Other, a Conflict Workbook. I actually really like that. I just recently discovered it. It has the same elements of the things that we talked about today, which is using elements of emotional intelligence and crucial conversations to help walk you through preparing for a communication breakdown or a conflict discussion, and then how to do it as a group. And I really like it because it has a DEI kind of perspective on it, which I think is really cool.
We have some people sharing. So somebody works in a hospital library, and the tool that they encourage them to use for working with upset patients is a heart. So it's apologize, hear, empathize, act, respond, and thank. And then another good tool is just setting regular check-ins and actively asking if the other party has any questions or wants any clarification. And then a recommendation for Anatomy of Peace. They read that in a book club. And we have a question. Could you share any tools for caring for yourself if you've done these things and there continues to be conflict on more of an organizational levels? So tools for not taking it too personally, getting too involved, etc. It's a great question.
I want to say that I haven't come across anything formally like a book other than just basic kind of self-care, self-reflection. Um, Especially if it's kind of at an organizational level. Um, One thing that I've tried to do, so the things that we were presenting on today, I've been trying to work in as like conflict resolution tools for my own team. And then I've tried it out with my own team, right? And then I've told other people in my organization about it. And then when it becomes something that people are like, oh, you have this tool, let me use that as well. That kind of helps as well because then it's something that kind of goes through the organization and helps conflict throughout it. So then it's not as hard as on you individually.
And then Emma says that the subtle art of not giving a bleep is is a book that can potentially help with that. And then we had another recommendation is just to practice all of these tools with low stakes stuff because when you actually have like a big and juicy conflict, it can be really hard and scary. So taking time to practice it with other people, colleagues, friends, and that kind of stuff. So that's really great advice also.
Yeah. And I can't, I guess, tell people enough. Like the more you practice this, the better you get. So I use some of these things not only for work, I use it for my personal life, and that helps me practice too. And then I find when I'm trying to use crucial conversations or I'm trying to get better with my emotional intelligence, like if there is a conflict that I'm using it for, um, I'll tell people like, hey, I'm not the best at this, but I'm trying, and this is kind of the way I'm doing it. And sometimes that helps.
Yeah, I could see that that could kind of even start diffusing the situation in and of itself. Like you're already having a conflict and you're like, you know what? Hey, I'm going to practice something and see how I do. And it probably already takes that, it might raise the empathy in the other person as you're doing that. So that's great.
I think to add to that, sometimes it is worth acknowledging and calling out, hey, I'm feeling a lot of really high emotions as we're talking about this, and asking for us, again, going back to time and place, asking for like a few minutes where you both have some time to emotionally regulate. That can be really helpful when you are having those conversations. But going back to what Tessie was saying, having that, at least for me, having that awareness of, oh, I'm up here now, it takes a lot of practice and it does take a lot of work. And yeah, it's having the tools is really helpful. Having them without practicing them makes it tough. And yes, humans are hard. It's our first time being alive, um, as far as we know. So, it can be tough for all of us.
Yeah. Are there any suggestions on how to handle communication breakdowns? Sorry, I've got Teams notifications coming in. Specifically with a supervisor, because there can be a degree of power imbalance.
Yes. So if the communication breakdown is with a supervisor, one thing that I would recommend is seeing, like, either you can ask them directly or you can, like, during the beginning slides, we had like the introspective time where we kind of sat down and we're like, okay, what tools are being used in my workplace? And thinking about like what tools that they already use. And if they don't have any, it's a really good chance to tell them about crucial conversations or something that you can give them tools and then use that as well. Um, I haven't personally experienced this, but I do want to say that if there is a structure in place already in your workplace, it helps when addressing someone higher up with a communication breakdown, because then they're supposed to be using that structure. And if they don't have one, try suggesting one.
And I think going back to what other people have said about practicing it, I definitely think that is the time to set a time and place for the conversation. So you're not like just springing it on. You want to have time to think about it so that you can regulate your emotions before going in, write things out if you need to, practice it with somebody else, that kind of thing, so that you can go in with the best framework possible. And then, maybe even acknowledge like, hey, you know what, you're my supervisor and I need to have a tough conversation with you, and sort of like, I'm going to do the best I can. Another question, do you have suggestions on how to handle a conflict where one employee feels disrespected by another person's actions, but the other employee firmly denies that behavior ever taking place? Ooh, you guys are asking some tough questions.
I think for that one, with the crucial conversations, the 3 steps of sharing the facts and then sharing the perspective of the facts and then asking for the other person's perspective of those facts. If you can get them to agree on the facts that happened, so not you hurt my feelings by doing this, but we had an interaction and these were the specific things that were said throughout that interaction. So just focusing on what happened. Then hopefully the second employee would have a chance to share their own story. And even if they deny the behavior took place, they should still be able to recall a conversation happening and hopefully can work from there.
Yeah. And it might also be that other employee using kind of the silence or violence, or in this case, silence, where they just don't want to have the conversation at all. And they're like, oh, this is not happening. And that's an opportunity. If you're having this conversation because you want a better relationship with them, going back to maybe one of the emotional intelligence pillars and being like, okay, how can I practice having an effective relationship with this person, and then maybe come back to this conversation because we're just not at this point that we can have it productively.
And we had a comment that says, that I think trying to slowly create a feedback culture would be extremely helpful. And I think that that is true, once again, of all organizations. We've sort of learned how to fear even feedback because we don't want anybody ever telling us like that we did something wrong. But I try to remember that feedback is a gift. And if it's given, hopefully with the best of intentions and received that way, that can help quite a bit. And then another question, what would you suggest if it seems like the conflict and difficult interactions are so ingrained across the organization, but leadership doesn't recognize that it's a problem, even after trying to communicate about it? And that is also a
So another reason why we're doing this presentation in the first place, but another reason why we had that introspective time at the beginning is that having the structures in place to address conflict, um, not everybody knows how to do it. And it's really important that if you're using some tools, that you share it with others in your organization and hope that that will help shift the culture of the organization, where that when conflict does arise, you guys do have tools across the organization, across teams, and you guys know, hey, this is what we do when we come into conflict. So I would say start small. Try it like with your team, try it with people that you don't have conflict with, and be like, hey, this structure is really cool. Maybe we should try it if something comes up next time.
And probably the hardest thing to hear would also be like, if it is so ingrained in the culture and it is really impacting your well-being, then figuring out what your exit strategy might be, which is terrifying in and of itself. But not every organization has a toxic environment. And so if you just find like you've tried things and you're not getting where you want and it's really impacting your physical and mental health, then as hard as it sounds, maybe trying to figure out where you might move to next.
To add to that, I do want to acknowledge that there is a difference between having a conflict and a communication breakdown and being harassed. Like if you're being harassed, if someone is using really, really cruel language towards you and making you feel unsafe, Colorado law, Colorado work law, it is illegal, whether that's a staff member or even a patron now. I think that's something to keep in mind. So these tools are really great for communication breakdowns and for conflicts. There is a certain threshold where even a conversation isn't going to help with that.
We have just a couple minutes left. Any other thoughts or questions you guys would like to share?
Yeah, and if a thought or a question comes up later, feel free. Andrea and I's emails are on the screen, so feel free to send us an email.
All right. Sorry, lost myself on my screens here. So as we wrap up today, I really want to thank Tessie and Andrea for being our facilitators for this excellent session. And I want to thank all of you who took the time out of your day to participate and attend. Just from the fact that people didn't tend to leave the breakout rooms early, it seemed like people were enjoying the conversation and kind of digging in. As I stated before, the archive should be available hopefully by tomorrow morning on Libraries Learn, and everybody who registered will also get an email that will link you there. If you want a certificate, in just a second, I'm going to place my email in the chat and you can email me directly for a certificate. And I'm going to right now pop a survey into chat. This is an anonymous survey. We'd love to know what you thought about today's session, what you liked, what worked, what didn't work. So you can feel free to fill that out. Once again, I'll link the survey and information about the certificate in the email that you should get tomorrow about the archive as well. So once again, I really want to thank both Tessie and Andrea for sharing their information and these tools. And I wish everybody has a really great afternoon.